So let's look at some of the activities that unions engage in order to organize the employees. So unions typically don't initiate organizing. Usually they're contacted by employees and there's some request made for assistance. And unions take that perspective as they are assisting in the organizing, but there needs to be people within an organization in order for organizing to be successful. So the emphasis of unions is on making sure that employees know the benefits of collective bargaining and the benefits of grievance procedures, and that these things will help to make employees more satisfied with their jobs and help them to overcome some of the concerns that they have with management. Union organizers are typically educators. They talk about the history of labor unions and the benefits of being part of a union. They encourage voting for unionization. So oftentimes they're looking for those people that are on the fence, and they're pushing a message towards those people on the fence because those are the people that they need to persuade. And they are a supporter. They work with those people who are the inside supporters of the union, and they give them support to push the union forward. When it comes to the business's perspective, the organization, the company, has a number of distinct advantages. First, it has full access to employees, and so it can communicate with them to present their own perspective of why unions are not the best idea for employees. Businesses can offer improvements, and therefore, as employees are thinking about what is the cost and benefit of unionization, they might think, well, it's not really worth paying union dues if these improvements have already been made. And businesses also can benefit from a general fear of change. It also takes quite a bit of time for successful union organization to take place. And therefore, time is often on the side of the company. Businesses typically have the money to hire labor lawyers and management consultants. And that is one way that they can craft and deliver a message to persuade employees to not vote in favor of the union. More unscrupulous businesses might spread rumors about potential job losses or plant closings. Again, here an organization would want to be careful about this. Again, rumors wouldn't be documented very clearly, and so if it's done surreptitiously, then an organization will likely get away with it. But again, the ethical perspective might prevent some managers from taking on those tactics. Another tactic might be for the business to say, hey, we've made mistakes in the past, but we want you to give us a second chance. That seems like a much more ethical way to address the concerns of employees. So some of the things that businesses can do is to contest the composition of the bargaining unit. Okay, so both the union and the business are going to make cases to the National Labor Relations Board about what the composition of that bargaining unit should be. And the employer would want to make a case for a bargaining unit that is less likely to vote in favor of in the representative election. Some illegal tactics that are considered unfair labor practices include making employees attend meetings that are not on the clock, that are not during their working hours, or discharging union supporters or union activists. That again would be an unfair labor practice. Making threats to employees that there's going to be job losses or pay decreases. Threats are an unfair labor practice. Now, there's different ways that the ratification of a union can take place. Sometimes there is voluntary recognition. So, for example, your book described a situation where the Dana Corporation had an arrangement to voluntarily recognize a union as long as enough cards had been signed. Okay, so in this case, the employer is saying we're going to remain neutral, we're not going to oppose or interfere with the organizing campaign. And again, in this example, the employer used card check as a proxy for the actual election so that they didn't have to go through a secret ballot election process. Now, there are some ways of increasing the success of organizing drives. So, for example, if a union can get an organization to sign a neutrality agreement, obviously that's going to lead to less contentiousness and therefore more likely to lead to a successful organizing drive. Organization could provide lists of employees to the union so that they could distribute the cards in a very organized fashion. They could agree to place time limits on the organizing campaign so it doesn't go on and on forever, but also it kind of there's a critical mass of signings that have to get done in a certain amount of time. So another way that unions are established are through a National Labor Relations Board directive. And in this circumstance, the NLRB makes an affirmative decision that the employer needs to recognize the union because of the pattern and practice of unfair labor practices committed by the union. And this was first established in a case called Giselle, and there were certain precedents set in this case for establishing an NLRB directive or a Giselle directive. So here, if the NLRB considers that there cannot be a fair impartial election because of the pattern of unfair labor practices committed by the employer, that would be one precedent for making this directive decision. Also, if the authorization cards are worded very clearly and unambiguously, so when people signed there was no reason to contest those, that would be another precedent for having a directive order. If all of the employee signatures were voluntarily obtained and there isn't evidence to the contrary, that could be another precedent for having an NLRB directive. And if a majority of bargaining unit employees sign the authorization cards, not just the 30% needed for a secret election, but over 50%. Okay, so all of these conditions need to be present for an NLRB directive to take place. And the most important element of this is the idea that a fair election isn't possible because of the unfair labor practices committed by the employer. Now, most union representation elections take place through the NLRB secret ballot election. Okay, so most companies don't do voluntary recognition. Most organizations, even if they contest an election or a card signing, aren't going to commit enough unfair labor practices to be handed a directive decision for recognition from the NLRB. So most take the secret ballot election process. And this is a process that is organized by the National Labor Relations Board. So the secret ballot election is organized by the NLRB, but before it can take place, there are a number of activities that the union goes through to make a case for there being enough support for a secret ballot election. So first, the union goes about contacting employees, ideally through their contacts within the organization. They gauge the interest that employees have, and they set up committees of employees to start organizing and communication efforts, and they build interest in the union by soliciting the signing of authorization cards. Now, as I said earlier, all that's needed is 30% of employees to sign authorization cards in order to demonstrate enough interest to have a secret ballot election. However, most organizers are going to want well more than that before they seek a secret ballot election. So most will go well over 50% and try and get at least 60 to up to 80% of employees to sign authorization cards before they seek a secret ballot election. Now, this whole process of organizing is expensive. I mean, it takes people inside the union who are collecting salaries in order to organize this work and get it accomplished. So there needs to be some way of recouping this cost. Okay, and so some of that can be by improving the economic situation of workers and therefore getting extra compensation that will come back through the union. So there'll be additional dues and fees that new members pay. And also there'll be an enhanced political influence that the union has. So the financial costs of organizing are typically offset both by the direct compensation that they receive through increasing the economic status of the membership and the dues that come from that, but there's also an indirect return through the political influence. Finally, there's an indirect benefit in that if the members are satisfied with the outcomes, that again leads to loyalty towards the union. So the union will file a petition for election with the NLRB when the employer refuses the union's recognition request. And most employers will, again, and refuse a recognition request because they want an opportunity to present a case against the union. And so most organizations are not going to just do a voluntary recognition. So the employer can petition for an election once the union seeks that recognition, and the union files an election petition with the NLRB. The union holds the authorization cards to show substantial interest. Again, 30% is enough. However, most times a union is going to want to have well more than 30% of the bargaining unit having signed an authorization card. The NLRB at that time will determine whether this union falls within its jurisdiction, and it will look at the union's petition and judge whether it's valid. And the NLRB, the employer, and the union will then discuss what is the appropriate bargaining unit composition, who's going to be eligible to vote, what is the ballot going to look like, when and where is the election going to take place. And for a consent election, both sides agree to all the election issues. Again, most elections are contested elections, and the NLRB has to hold a hearing to resolve differences between the employer and the union.